Hey folks, and welcome back. Today we are doing our first full standard run clear. I should mention that this run doesn't have any upgrades as far as the persistent upgrades go. That is, no extra HP, no extra energy, no other unlockables via memoria or potential. I tried to clear the standard mode with no difficulty modifiers and no bonus modifiers, just to start with, to practice and learn all of the basics, I guess, about the game before going forwards. Unfortunately, I did start with the Echo Cave here. Obviously, it is randomized, but this is, in my opinion, one of the harder ones to start with because Echo Beast is, at least in the current build, extremely tanky. And if you don't get lucky with damage buffs, attack damage in specific, the fight will not just be long, it will be fairly difficult. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how level generation works and how difficulty works in this game, basically the first level will start at a certain difficulty. In this case, it is 0 difficulty, unless you change it by modifiers. And each subsequent level will go up in difficulty by 1. Again, unless you have modifiers. And this is actually one of the easier bosses to do unless you're on the higher difficulties, because with the higher difficulties the projectiles will be more and you will have less space to dodge. So we kill it fairly quickly, get our memoria, and in here I believe I go for Band of Might. I think I was checking out what each of these do. But basically, I learned after a few runs in standard mode is that the best strategy is to pretty much stack attack damage. And whenever you do see a glory zone, it is extremely helpful to do them. They are not very challenging, and the rewards are very well worth it. In here, I just really derp, get hit by 3 times, get hit 3 times by that thing. And by playing around with the editor, I actually found out how those things work just by their name. I believe they're called sound detector or something. Basically, whenever you do something that creates sound, so dashing, jumping, shooting, they will shoot. And in here we got a fairly good upgrade, the one that reduces the charge time. It is pretty good DPS increase overall, especially if you combine it with Intensify or Intensifier. As you can see, I am skipping most of the enemies. It seems that, and I'll try to explain the how each level is generated. Basically, each level has what they call chunks, and each chunk is set. So, for the first chunk, for example, you can get 1 out of 2 or out of 3 possible chunks. So once you go through the same level multiple times, you'll see all the possible formations for the first chunk. And then here I should mention that I did buy HP up to 2 away from full, because if, and that is a big if, I kill this boss without taking damage, then I will be going back to full HP. But anyway, going back to how the level generations work. So let's say you go through the same level multiple times. You'll see all the possible scenarios for the first chunk, and then you'll see all the possible scenarios for the second chunk, and so on and so forth. And I believe there are 4 chunks with default difficulty modifiers. So you can get a very large number of permutations, but for each one you should be able to know what you need to do for each one. And I believe all the enemies in each chunk have the same chance of the enemies that drop HP packs in each chunk are always set. It's not random. So once you do go through the same chunk multiple times and you kill all the enemies and so on, and you start to learn which enemies you need to kill, which enemies you need to skip. Things like armor, though, are completely random. So if you are, if you want to play it a bit on the careful side, it might be a good idea to kill everything. But obviously, the drawback would be that you might be taking damage from them. And in here we got the power-up that draws items to you. And it is good, but the way the items get drawn to you is really odd. They're very slow and they go in a weird arc. So sometimes they can get stuck behind ledges and so on. And in here, one tip I will give now about this mini boss is that if there is a big jump while it's chasing after you, just hide under the ledge and let the boss go in front of you, and you can actually damage it as you're going through this section, which makes the boss phase much easier and much quicker. This boss is a bit tanky, but it has a very consistent pattern. But yeah, going back to how to build a character. Basically, you want to stack as much attack damage as possible. So whenever you have the option to get attack damage, go for it. With the exception of a few things like the intensifier. That one, even though it doesn't give attack damage, it is the more important ones. One of the more important ones. Here it is. It is extremely useful. Things like the Dragon Fang helmet. The one that once you fire off a charged attack, your next attack will also be charged. That is very useful. And as you can see, we got lucky with another Band of Might. And here, this bat is super annoying. Bats or flying enemies in this game are just really annoying, especially when it comes to the platforming sections. And as you can see, I'm not doing very well on HP, so the fact that I did end up clearing this should prove that no matter how bad you do, it's always possible to kind of make a comeback. And here I think I was trying to figure out what's up there, because it is it's an odd little space, but there is nothing. And the higher you go up in difficulty for each level, the more challenging the chunks are. One of the more annoying ones, in my opinion, is Penumbra level. On the higher difficulties, it just becomes so confusing. And these are really good in most scenarios, these random arenas, because with every wave, you get HP. And in here, not only did I get HP, I also got armor. And we get this Vertibeam power up, which I believe I turn off because it is not very useful. Actually, it never even activated because I am at the CP limit. And to explain a few things, there are cores and there are augments. Cores take CP, augments do not. So with cores, let's say you get 5 of them, odds are you won't be able to use all 5 of them. You have to pick which ones to activate, which ones to deactivate, and you can do it at any time you want. So, let's say, you know, you're fighting a boss, and the boss is very close to you in one of the phases. So you can activate a power-up that increases your damage up close. And if the boss is far away from you, then you can deactivate it. Here's Zen Primus. You can dash through these attacks, but the better way to actually dodge that attack is to simply jump up and behind the boss. And as you can see, our damage is incredibly high right now. So we do nuke the boss very quickly. Right, we pick up our potential fragments and we pick up the Zen Motor, which I think is one of the more useful powers, especially against lethal tempo. And I'm not sure if I did end up using it in this run or not. But for lethal tempo, what I like to do is start from the bottom up. And the last one, you can just spam Zen Motor if you have it. Or the wind one. Just to make it easier, it's not completely necessary. Deep Verse, I did get, I would say, lucky with this one that it's not towards the end of the run, because Legacy is definitely one of the harder bosses to scale. He's definitely, I feel he's one of the more aggressive bosses. And if he has a lot of HP, as what happens with higher levels, then it can be a challenge to keep up with his aggression. And here, this is one of the more trickier platforming sections, just because it's kind of difficult to pay attention to the spikes as well as the arrays. And the snake boss, one of the more tankier ones, but I believe our damage is really high in this run. That being said, do pay attention to where the tail detaches. In here, I don't get hit by the tail at all, which is definitely doable, but sometimes I just get a bit impatient, reckless, etc. And Armatort's helmet is extremely useful, especially with higher difficulties, just because you get a chance to effectively double your healing. And the difference between armor and health is that armor, when you have it, you actually do not get knocked back. So let's say you get hit by a spike. If you simply have HP, then getting hit by the spike can also cause you to get knocked into environment damage. If you have armor, then you're simply going to get hit by the spike, and that's it. And this is really what you just saw now is kind of annoying, and it happens more often than you would think, where you get stuck in one of those platforms that spawns and despawns. Dragon Pant's set is, in my opinion, the strongest set in the game. Double jump, while I don't have it active, is very, very useful. And especially on Hoot Omega's level and the boss fight, it can make things much easier and much faster. And here I get a potato battery. Not the most useful thing. You'll rarely ever run out of energy in this game, and powers in general just aren't that useful. There are 2, maybe 3 scenarios where I think powers are useful, but that's about it. And in here, I think I still wasn't too used to Legacy's fight. But basically, when Legacy summons his things around him, what you want to do is, if he's on the upper side of the arena, basically what I just did, then go on the other upper side of the arena. If he is on the lower one, go on the other lower side of the arena, and cut him up or down after he is about to reach you. And definitely having a lot of damage in this run helped a lot. As you can see, you get to skip a lot of the annoying parts. And you pick up Negation Pulse, which is also extremely useful against Zen Primus. You can, in fact, remove all of the fires around you. And here was a bit slow. You can simply jump on the platform below the wizard and jump off of it. Do pay attention to these black orbs. When the things that respawn them infinitely are not close to them, then you can simply kill them to make your job easier. And of course, it goes without saying, but simply moving non-stop helps a ton. And here I was just gathering my thoughts, just thinking what I was supposed to do. This was my first time seeing this junk. And in Penumbra, do be careful of the core that sends out the burst when you dash, because it can actually mess you up. It can turn on switches that you never intended to be turned on, or turn them off. And for this boss, I never really felt the need to use the spike mechanic. If you're comfortable with the boss, you don't really need it. It can make it a bit longer, but in this case we have so much damage that it was actually easier to just charge attack the bosses. And here you see what I was talking about the drawing power. Items just fly all over the place. And in here I probably should have gone with Band of Might, but what happened was that I felt very comfortable with the damage that I was doing, and I was focusing more on improving survivability. And this is one of the more annoying glory zones, just because right off the bat, you get an endlessly spawning black orb, and the other orbs never really aggro until you jump on the red one. This part is extremely basic. I think the only thing that might throw you off is the last one. And as I mentioned, Dragon Pent is very, very useful. And what I end up doing is that I get rid of the increased charge speed and go for more HP. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have, just because it's quite a bit of damage. And in here we get an extra band of might, which is always nice. I believe this was also my first time doing this chunk, but basically you want to dash jump between all the platforms and go as fast as you can. Definitely get more lucky with armor. I thought I could make that jump, but couldn't. So I go back and I do it the way you are supposed to do it, by jumping on this platform first and then onto the wall. For example, here, dash or dashing might mess you up if you have the burst when you dash core augment. And this part, this is an easy way to skip it. I believe it's intended to be a bit longer, but you can simply skip to the wall and then you go to this part. Fairly annoying, but it's all time based. So just take your time with it, especially if you're not running the timer modifier. And remember, you don't need to kill every enemy. I do kill it either way because I was paranoid about this little ball. And we are at the boss. And obviously whenever you get a scrap recycler, check it out. This is extremely useful, the little needle. You get a ton of attack damage out of it. As you can see, I have a +7 if I actually exchange the gloves, as I do. For the chest, I get +9. And my thought process for this was to just change the augments, because I won't be killing much. The only thing you kill in this fight are the little circles, which aren't, you know, the chance of you getting HP out of them is fairly low. So I think, okay, well, damage is probably better. And here I take an extra hit from the red one, which shouldn't happen. The blue one, basically you go to either side of the arena and jump. The green one is what you want to focus on killing as fast as you can, because those black holes will make the arena extremely difficult to navigate. Basically, this is what you want to happen in a good run when you're stacking attack damage. You basically just nuke the bosses. Crushing Void, not very useful. Next up is Clock Zone. And as you can see, we went up in the difficulty, and at a certain threshold, the game will keep throwing bats at you, or flying units at you. They're not difficult. They rarely ever drop HP, armor, etc. They're just a minor inconvenience, especially when you are at platforming parts. And this one, really, you just want to wait for it to go to the left. You come here, you jump, make sure you don't get clipped. Wall jump again, and you're safe. More bets, and this is when I realize, hey, maybe I can put one of my armor pieces on that can give me HP, but then I read it and it restores HP when you get a kill. It doesn't spawn HP. If it were to spawn HP, you can actually combine that with the one that gives you armor when you pick up HP. But since I'm full HP, then activating the chest piece would be useless. So I decide to keep the gloves for the extra +2 damage, not necessarily for the increased charge speed. And here I decide to check what this place is again. There is absolutely nothing. And these things, do make sure to kill them before you get on the platformers, just to clear your way. And their range isn't as bad as the ones in the Echo Cave. The ones in the Echo Cave, you'll see that they can throw something 2 screens away from you and still manage to hit you. This boss, as I mentioned before, you really just want to get comfortable just having those 3 gears being flung at you at all times. It's not a speed test. It's not something that you need to go as fast as possible with. It can be a bit annoying when you are on a platform like that with very little room to navigate. But you can usually stand on one of the edges. And the mini boss itself does not do damage, so you can actually touch it if you need to. And Frail Glory is very, very useful, especially if you have the power that draws items to you, because the only time you would really lose Frail Glory for good is when you get hit by environments, so like falling in lava, falling in the air, etc. But when you have the augment that draws the items to you, even that won't be a problem, because you can simply wall hop next to it and attract it. And another thing to know about Frail Glory is that if you have armor and you get hit, you will not lose it. It's only direct HP damage. And the way it works, in case you don't know, is that it increases your damage, but every time you get hit, you drop it, and you have to pick it up again. And I do believe in this run, I actually drop it at some point later on, and I don't pick it up. So, not ideal, but not completely necessary. As you can see, I'm already at plus 12 attack damage. And you're gonna see how quick lethal tempo dies. And as I mentioned, you start from the bottom up. The reason you want to do that is because it's easier to avoid lasers by jumping down rather than navigating up, because some of these jumps are not very easy to do. Another thing to notice is that the negation power can also save you from some of the sticky situations. And as you can see, this is what you do with the Zen motor at the end. Just stand under it and spam it 4 to 5 times, and it's dead. In my opinion, this is the easiest boss right there with Zen Primus. Zen Primus can be a bit challenging if you don't have enough damage for him, and if you don't have the negation power. And as you can see, right when we loaded into the level, it said that we got +1 attack damage, and that's from the needle. What the needle does is that it gives you +1 attack damage and +1 for every level that you clear after it. So it really stacks up. And one thing to notice is that we are currently at only 6 out of 8 bosses. I imagine once the 2 next levels get added, the standard mode will be full 8 clears, and so the needle will gain even more value. I believe I was just taking a breather here because it can be a bit taxing on your fingers and your wrists. These things, just kill them. Don't make it hard on yourself, unless obviously it's very easy. I didn't need to kill that one, I just thought that, hey, maybe it can drop armor. And here, just make sure that you kill the daggers. Frail Glory. See, this is what I mentioned. Having the augment that draws items to you can be very useful with Frail Glory, because in situations where you don't have it, I would have just lost Frail Glory for good that run. And I drop down here for the Glory Zone. Definitely one of the easier ones, especially if you take your time clearing the daggers. Just need to be comfortable with the dash jump off the wall in here. We got Owl Hawk, one of the more useless cores in my opinion. As far as I know, power builds are very weak in this game. Personally, I haven't experimented with one myself, but... And in here I do get lucky, I kill the dagger by dashing, so I didn't have to worry about it. And we get to the mini boss. This is one of the parts where the bats can be annoying. So if you are at +3, I believe, or above, you want to pay attention to the bats. Besides that, again, play it patiently, as long as you don't have the timer on. And even if you do have the timer on, and I will be uploading a video about that, it shouldn't be an issue to just take your time. Stats item, definitely one of the more useful ones. I almost always pick it up, and this one is a definite pickup. Contractor Omega is stupidly useful. It gives you +3 attack damage, +3 HP, +3 energy. The energy is not very useful, but the HP and the attack damage, that is a lot of value out of one item. And since this is the last level, the platforming sections are a bit trickier. So you need to be comfortable with the clouds, you need to be comfortable with the jumping blue squares. But basically abuse them to your advantage. You can hover on them for as long as you want and kill any enemies before you move forwards. And before the boss, there is always this double jump section. Get another potato energy. Owl Hawk talons, not very useful. And we head to the last boss fight. So the reason I do this jump attack is that sometimes you can actually hit the boss, Omega, Hoot Omega, right as it's flying away and actually damage it. And in here, major misplay by me, but again, the reason it didn't punish me too bad is because my damage was high enough for the boss to transition to the next phase and not stick around. Do pay attention to the cloud storms. The higher the difficulty is, the less time you get between each storm. So the farther this level is in the run, the more patient you need to be and the more careful you need to be. And in there, definitely a terrible play by me, but one thing about this game is that the later levels are in fact a bit more forgiving because you're gonna have way more stats, way more HP, way more chances to mess up. And as you can see, the storms happen way too often. And this is one of the more annoying parts. If you don't have enough damage for this, it can be aggravating because you don't get a lot of room, and the room that you get is really dependent on the jumping pad not being in the lightning. And there you have it, our first standard run with no upgrades by memoria or potential. Next up, we will be covering modifiers and what you can expect from them. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.